Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Women's Soccer Show, and welcome to the start of Olympics 2024 coverage. It feels like it's so far out that I can't believe I'm saying that, but it's not that far out. And for this Olympic coverage, we are going to be doing something similar in the lead up, honestly, the same that we did for the World Cup because it worked so well, which is we are going to be doing group by group previews. Each group gets its own episode and its own preview. So this is preview of Group A for the Olympics, episode 1. Obviously, next episode will be preview for Group B. These preview episodes will drop every Monday starting today. Next week will be Group B. The following week on the 15th will be Group C. And finally, on the 22nd will be our preview predictions episode, just 3 days before the tournament kicks off on the 25th. And joining me for this first group preview is the one and only Amy O'Connor.
Oh, thanks for having me back, Sarah. I appreciate it. Excited to talk about the Olympics.
Very excited. It's always a hit or miss whether I think, I'm excited to have you back on or not. And I always end up doing it. So whatever.
That's fair.
No, I'm just kidding. Do you remember which World Cup episode you were on for the preview? I know you're on the World Cup final, but I mean for the preview groups.
I previewed England's group.
England, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, sadly, I'm sorry to start this off. This isn't supposed to be a blow. Sadly, there's no Team GB.
Very sad. Yeah, I'm really sad that we don't get to talk about Team GB because
they're
obviously,
interesting.
Yeah, it would have been interesting. And obviously, my allegiances are heavily towards Team GB. So it won't be the same to not have them in the competition. But I'm excited to preview all the other teams.
It is fun sometimes to watch a competition that you really don't really have an allegiance towards a team in because you just kind of let your heart go where it goes. That's what happens to me every men's World Cup because I don't care about the men's U.S. national team.
I mean, no one cares about the men's national team, U.S. national team. They're terrible.
Exactly.
I mean, my heart tells me anybody but the U.S. in this competition as well. So sorry, Sarah, but anyone but the U.S.
That's a great segue because the U.S. are not even defending champions here. They won bronze in the previous Olympics, and we have the defending Olympic champions in this Group A. So let's get into it. I said this to you before I hit record. This is a wild group. This is really fun. And then you, in response, said that really all of them are, and that's true too. But let's do this. Group A, we have France, Colombia, Canada, and New Zealand. Canada, of course, the defending champions. None of these teams were in the same group at the World Cup. And we're going to reference the World Cup a lot in this simply because it was less than a year ago. So that's the last major tournament we have to reference. Obviously, we'll talk about the Gold Cup and any previous performances as well, or since the World Cup, but it is worth mentioning. So France and Canada did face each other in the lead up to the World Cup. In April of 2023, France won that 2-1. That's kind of the most recent meeting between those two sides. Really, none of these teams have played each other all that much in recent years. You would think that maybe Canada and Colombia faced each other in the Gold Cup, in the W Gold Cup, the inaugural one this year, but they did not. Actually, they haven't faced each other since 2021. So this is going to be exciting. And I think not just because all of these teams play different styles, haven't really seen each other a lot. It's going to be a chess match where they have to figure each other out, but also because when I look at all of these teams, maybe not New Zealand, but specifically and definitely France, Colombia, and I'll throw Canada in there too. These are all teams where any version of any of these teams can show up. The France team that has the potential to win the World Cup could show up, and the France team that has the potential to flame out in the group stage can show up. And I could say the same about Colombia. We'll get into their performances since the World Cup as well. And I mean, Canada, again, we'll get into the why of that, but same thing, coming off of a gold medal in an Olympics and to be determined if they're even going to make it out of this group stage.
I think the exciting thing is that we've seen these teams play fairly recently. So we know kind of what to expect from them. Also in terms of who might be in their squad. We can get into the depth of the squads a little bit when we start to break down each team. But yeah, so recently just watched England play France twice. So
Yeah.
I'm very well versed in France. And then we watched Colombia play, and I'm not going to call it the W Gold Cup. It's just the Gold Cup. Okay. Just dropping that W straight away.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So we watched Colombia and Canada play in the Gold Cup recently. So we know what they're about. And again, New Zealand, we can only reference them probably from the World Cup standpoint. And they opened the World Cup well. They won their first game. Bit of a shock against Norway, we would say.
Yeah.
And then they really sort
We'll
of
always
petered out.
remember that.
Yeah, we'll always have that, but they did peter out in the end, and
They
they
did.
lost. They lost in the groups to the Philippines, which would be a bit of a shocker too for them, a bit of a disappointment. So yeah, we're well versed in at least 3 of these teams, and watching them recently will be very helpful in breaking them down.
Very much so. We'll get into all of those details. We're going to kick it off with France, but before we do so, I just want to highlight the first game of this group is going to be France versus Colombia. And I just love when I get that kind of matchup for the first game of the group. If I were to pick a matchup between these 4 teams, France, Colombia, Canada, and New Zealand, that I'm most excited for, it 100% is France versus Colombia. So for that to be the first game to kick this group off, a lot will hang in the balance. A lot will be on the line in that first game. And I am so very excited. But let's get into it. We're going to talk France first for many reasons, but also just because I wrote them down first. But also listen, France is always an interesting one. They just always are. And perhaps maybe the most recent developments coming in the form of news out of France, in that we talked about this in one of our main episodes. Amy Hervé Renard, their brand new head coach, who was hired in March 2023, March a year ago, has announced that he will be leaving. That was a really positive hire. He seemingly was very liked by a lot of players. Wendy Renard, Katoto, and Diani all said that they would not play for former head coach Corinne Diacre. And with the hiring of Hervé Renard, they all participated in training in the World Cup. And listen, we knew that the FFF still had a lot of issues. Despite this very positive hiring that did seem like a step forward, and the fact that he is resigning is a real blow. And I have to kick it off with that because we don't know how that's going to affect this team. Is it going to affect them positively or negatively?
The French are always very volatile. I feel like there's, we talked about this before, how there's no stability around that team, and there always seems to be conflict, whether it be with the coach, whether it be interplayer fighting. There was an incident a while back where something happened where 2 of the players got into it from 2 different teams in France, and one, I think, threatened some sort of like retribution of some kind. It was a whole story, and I think maybe you guys talked about it, but there's always some sort of scandal when it comes to the French team. And since Renard has come in, it seems to have settled down a lot, and the players are enjoying playing, and we can see them playing freely and putting together some good performances. I thought that they performed really well so far in their group that they're in with England, Sweden, and the Republic of Ireland. And they looked like once they got that result in England, that they could go on and potentially just win the group easily. And then we saw a performance in France that kind of wasn't exactly convincing. And I think, but we also saw a good performance from England. So
I was going to say that was a really good performance from England.
Yeah, take nothing away from England. I think that was a very good performance from England. So I think that France are that nearly team. They're the nearly team, right? And if they can get it together and make it click and get past, they always seem to stumble like at the final hurdle, whether it be against Germany in the last Euros or, in the World Cup, they lost on penalties to Australia. In the big moments, can they push through? They have the experienced players there. They have the Renards who've been there, done it. They've won the Champions League. Plenty of players there. Amadine Henry, Leissamer. And I'd love to see France win something at the women's level now. I think it's time. Their men's team have been doing well, and I think that the women need to get on par with what the men are doing, because they have so much talent. And I'm fearful for them after the Olympics, and what's going to happen and who's going to transition into that role. as head coach. We still don't know that, and I don't think there's been much chatter about who is going to replace Renard. But for this tournament, I think they've got a really good chance of winning it. And we say this in most tournaments that France are in, but they really do.
That's what I'm saying is this is a team that kind of always can win the tournament, but we just have no idea which version of this team is going to show up. And you look at this group and just upon first glance, without thinking about it, France should be the favorites to advance first, but I really think it's going to be a toss-up. Now, let's get into it because you mentioned that they lost to Australia. A quick reminder for everybody about France's 2023 World Cup performance. They ended up flaming out in an epic penalty shootout, just a shootout for the ages, lost in the quarterfinals, 7-6 in penalty kicks to the host nation, Australia. Before that, they finished first in their group ahead of Jamaica. And then, of course, Brazil and Panama did not qualify. In their group, they had 2 wins, 1 draw. That 1 draw was against Jamaica. They beat Morocco with a whopping 4-0 in the round of 16 before then losing to Australia in those quarterfinals. But their history in the Olympics has to be noted. They have not historically performed well in the Olympics. First of all, they have not qualified for a lot of Olympics. And I think that has to be taken with a grain of salt because the teams that they're qualifying against are arguably the strongest in the world. Arguably, France has the hardest time, or anybody in Europe really has the hardest time getting into the Olympics. But they've competed in 2012 and 2016. They have not been in an Olympics since then, and their best result was 4th place in 2012. They lost to Japan in the semifinals to end up in the 3rd place match versus Canada, where they lost to Canada, and Canada got the bronze medal. So that's a little bit of a fun redemption. Obviously, I think a little too far back for any of these players to have been a part of or remember, but perhaps it's part of the history that's sewn in.
Yeah, I think that, like we said before about France, just they're the nearly team, and hopefully can push to get over the line, especially in this group, which is a tough group to get out of in the first place. They're all tough groups. There's no easy groups here either. Yeah. So, and the scheduling is pretty hectic, but there's not a lot of break. It's 2 days break between each game, which is insane to me as well. So really it's about which squad prepares the best for each game, who's picked the best players to go to the tournament, and which coach uses their squad the best.
A lot of players, I think that's a great point. A lot of players, including most recently, I spoke with Jordan Heidema, and she was talking a lot about how because there's 18 players, everybody is going to get a lot of minutes on their body. This isn't a tournament where you can have your best 11 or best 13 and they get most of the minutes. Everybody has to be ready to carry a lot of the load. And so, as you mentioned, squad depth actually plays a huge role in the Olympics.
Well, yeah, and I think that France's key players are back. Obviously, Katoto was hurt in the last tournament. And then the good thing they have is a mix of young and old. So they have the youth and the players who aren't afraid to take people on, who don't necessarily have a lot to lose. And then you've got the old heads in there. You've got the Leysomers, you've got the Amadine Henrys, and even to a certain extent, your Delphine Cascarinos and your Dianis who've been there, done it.
And your Wendy Renards.
Yeah, of course, Wendy Renard. I mean, that goes without saying. She's the talisman for this team. There's no one else who can do what she does. She's a centre back of high quality, but also scores goals for France and for Lyon. So she poses a threat at both ends of the pitch. And then you've got, for me, probably the most underrated player in the squad in Kenza Dali at Aston Villa. When I watched her play the first game against England, I thought she was fantastic. I thought she was probably the best player on the pitch for large periods of time. And it's great that she's getting the opportunity now to shine. I mean, she was at West Ham for a period of time. I don't think she was getting selected for France based on those performances. But now being at Aston Villa, again, they haven't had a great season, but Kenza Dali has had a good season. And I think that Kenza Dali needs to also push on with her career as an individual and look outside of Aston Villa and maybe go to a top team now to progress even further, because she's going to have a big impact on this team and what they do in this tournament.
I agree. I mean, you look at this list of players, like if you just name standout players that quite literally everybody in the world who follows women's soccer on, a month-to-month basis, even not even week to week, would know. Wendy Renard, Katoto, Diani, Le Sommer, Henri, Marjorie, who we haven't even talked about, Cascarino, Dolly. I mean, you look at that list and you kind of wonder, how can they not at least make a run at the gold? But like we said, completely unpredictable. Nevertheless, always exciting. I guess my final question is, my final question is, do you want to talk prediction for France now, or you want to wait until the end until we can do it all at once with all of
I
the
mean,
teams?
I can say what I think. I think
Yeah.
France should win this group. And they're
Do you
pretty good.
expect them to come out and perform?
I do. They're pretty good
Good.
in the group stages of competitions. And we look at that. It's that they don't
Mm.
falter really in the group stages. It's in the quarterfinals or semi-finals that they find it hard to progress. So I expect France to finish top of this group.
All right. I'm going to save mine for the end, I guess.
Okay, fair enough.
No, I'll say. I want to save it to the end because sometimes when I talk through them, it kind of changes my mindset. So I'm going to save mine for the end. Coming off of France, we're going to go right into Colombia. And before we even get into all of this, because there's a lot here. What I'm most excited for in the France versus Colombia game is how these two very, very different styles of play are going to match up with each other. France, very classically European style. Colombia, I would call them, at least of recent, a very classically CONCACAF style. And that can be taken in whatever way people want to take it. What do you expect? What are you excited for these two? Or I guess not excited for. What do you expect from these two styles of play matching up? And who do you think it benefits more?
I think the first game, Colombia will be very physical. We've seen them do that. This is kind of because they're transitioning coaching staff as well. The head coach seems to now favor this aggressive style of football more so than the fluid style of football that we saw from Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
We saw patches of them being, overly aggressive and diving. I don't like that side of things. I'm fine with the aggression as long as it's controlled and in a football way. I don't want people to be overly aggressive, and the diving and the cheating is not for me either. That winds me up a lot. I think it kind of brings the women's game into the same realm as the men's game, and we're not trying to do that. I mean, I know it's a lot of gamesmanship as well, and a lot of the Latin style of football is that played that way, and they will be watching the male counterparts and seeing them play that way, and also a lot of the coaching staff is male, so there is that influence, unfortunately. But I would expect Colombia to be physical and play on the counter attack and to try and ruffle some feathers with France. And I expect France to play their game, which is get the ball down on the floor and play possession football and link passes, and also they can be a threat from set pieces, as we know from Wendy Renard. Mm-hmm. So totally different styles of football. I'd love to say that I'm going to see something different from Colombia, but I doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you said that because that was kind of what I wanted to get into. Because when we talk about Colombia and we talk about these two teams facing off and who does it benefit more, my immediate answer is, well, it depends on which Colombia shows up. And we have to talk about how they have changed since the World Cup. They were truly some of the darlings, other than the host nations. They were the darlings of this World Cup. Everybody fell in love with them. They played a beautiful style of football. It was creative. It was free-flowing. There's young talent there like Linda Caicedo that is just so fun to watch. I also loved watching Lacey Santos. She arguably for me is equally as important to them as Linda Caicedo. But like you said, we saw some of the physicality coming out in the World Cup, but I would argue that that was just in the last game against England. Obviously, in the World Cup, they lost to England in the quarterfinals 2-1. And I would argue that was the only game I saw some physicality coming out of them. And it seemed like it was a pure frustration in the quarterfinals of the World Cup. And that is understandable. And then you flash to the Gold Cup. And I think we talked about this because we did a special for the USA Colombia game during the Gold Cup, Amy, is that they've fully transitioned into just leaning into the physicality of it to the point where we were sitting there saying, why aren't they even trying to play football? It felt like they weren't even trying to link passes. And it's like this team that had so much potential to play a beautiful brand of Latin American football leaned into the really negative side of it. And that was really disappointing to see. And I hope we don't see a continuation of that here.
Well, I also think that Linda Caicedo kind of, flashed onto the scene during the World Cup. And now teams will be a little bit more savvy when playing against her. They know what she has to offer. Also in the Gold Cup, they were missing Myra Ramirez. And Myra Ramirez is a big part of how they play and what their style of football is. So that could also have, they had Usme too. But I think that kind of shifted their style because they didn't have that point player, hold the ball up, run in the channels, because Myra Ramirez can do absolutely everything, as we've seen for Chelsea this season. It's been fantastic. So I'm with Myra Ramirez back in the fray. We could see that Colombia come back. I'm hopeful that we'll see that Colombia come back, but there may be a balance of these two things coming out where it's physical, but also some good style of football. That's the hope.
All right. The Olympic history for Colombia, they were not in the past World Cup. They were in the 2016. They're not in the previous Olympics. I keep calling it the World Cup. In Tokyo, they were in the previous one in 2016. They finished in 4th place in their group. They were in a group with New Zealand and France. So that's an interesting tidbit. They ended up finishing 4th. New Zealand finished 3rd, France 2nd, USA 1st. Of course, Colombia have come a very, very long way since 2016. They're a very different team. It'll be really interesting to see how this team unfolds. And I think it'll dictate a lot about where they're headed.
Yeah, and I think the first game, the important thing is for both teams is not to lose. So
yeah,
it really is important to just not lose the first game. So we'll see if Colombia becomes a little bit more defensive minded, tries not to lose the game, and France tries to win the game.
And third, we are on to Canada, the defending Olympic gold medalists. It was such a hot topic when they won the gold medal to begin with. People were saying they didn't deserve it. But you know what? If you win a gold medal, you deserve that gold medal. End of story. So
Who was saying they didn't deserve it?
A lot of people who were saying that they were just kind of like playing for the tie, playing to go to pens, not necessarily playing to win in regulation time. Probably a lot of people in the United States.
Yeah, I was going to say, was it a lot of Americans, Sarah? Because that would sound accurate.
I was not one of them, though. I think Bev Priestman is an outstanding coach, and she plays the tactics, and she has a game plan for every single game. And what Canada did really well in Tokyo in 2021 is execute. That's exactly what happened. But they're coming in a completely different situation now. Let's talk about their 2023 World Cup, because I think there's a lot of history in the past year and a half for this team that really affects how they've been performing.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's been a massive step back for this team and the support that they're getting from the Canadian Football Federation, and lack of support they're getting from the Football Federation, and the way the players are having to come out and try and seek support for themselves and explain what's going on. And it's very reminiscent of other nations that have had to fight these battles. Jamaica, who started a GoFundMe to go to the World Cup. Canada should not be in that bracket. There is no chance that a gold medal winning Olympic team should be in a bracket of teams where they're not being funded by the Football Federation. I mean, the men's team are not very good. They're not. And if anyone deserves to not be funded, it's them.
Yeah.
Give the funding to the women's team, who are actually successful and have some of the greatest players that have ever played the game. I mean, I can name one Canadian men's soccer player.
I can't name any. I literally can't name any.
The only reason I can name him is because he plays for Bayern Munich. I can name countless women's players, and obviously Christine Sinclair being the GOAT, who deserves so much better than the way that things happened in the World Cup. I would say that,
to say the least. And you mentioned it, so let's get into it. Canada, honestly, they were arguably in the most fun group to watch in the group stages of the World Cup. They were with Nigeria, Ireland, and Australia. They finished 3rd. They did not advance past the group stage. It was obviously a disappointment for them, but this was a team We talked about this in the lead up to the World Cup. This was a team that was in the midst of, as you just said, Amy, a big fight with their federation, and they still are over equal pay and equal treatment. In the lead up to the World Cup, they were legally forced to play in She Believes Cup. The team wanted to boycott it, but they were going to have to pay such big amounts of money in fines for boycotting it that they just had to end up playing. That was their lead up to the World Cup. It was tumultuous. And the question, I think, in the lead up to the World Cup was, this is a team that's kind of in turmoil, in a fight with their federation. We've seen that play out well for teams like the US. The question before the World Cup was, would this galvanize Canada or would it hurt them? And the answer, obviously, is the latter. It was not a positive effect on Canada. And I think the reason for that is it can galvanize you if you have the like base level of resources that you need, which is what the U.S. women's national team had. Canada does not even have the base level of resources that they need to train properly, to travel places. So obviously this can't galvanize them if they're just still needing trainers, people to help player safety. The list goes on and on. So to say that that fight is still going on, let's bring it into the present. I expect it to unfortunately affect them the same way in these Olympics.
Yeah, it's very sad. And like you mentioned, the US does have a good baseline of support facilities, funding, all of those things that Canada doesn't have. And they still don't have it. And I quite frankly don't understand why, because their women's team has been very successful on the world stage and has always been a powerhouse. The rivalry between the US and Canada on the women's level is, pretty much unrivaled. I think it's Mexico as well now, I would say, coming into it a little, because Mexico haven't been that great at the women's level, but now their program is competitive. So that could also be a fun rivalry. But for the ages, it's always been Canada, and Canada has always been at the big tournaments. But on the men's level, they haven't. I think that's the first World Cup they ever qualified for the last World Cup.
I was just about to say, they just qualified for their first World Cup on the men's side.
But you can bet your bottom dollar that men's team was funded well to go to that World Cup and given everything they needed. But now they're questioning the women's team. And to me, that's embarrassing for the Canadian Soccer Federation. They need to sort their priorities out and really fund this team so that they can compete again, because I think we've seen a drop off in what they're capable of doing. So, and that's sad. It's very sad.
I think we have as well. And let's get into that right now. I'll say I don't think we've really seen them tested since the World Cup. In the Gold Cup, they played El Salvador, Costa Rica, and Paraguay in the group stages, and then they lost to the USA in penalty kicks in the quarterfinals. But we can't even reference that game because that was the infamous puddle-soaked field where we can't really even call that soccer. So
no, there's no football played.
No, we can't really reference that. So we don't necessarily have that many games that were competitive to go off of for Canada, but we can look at some of their roster and say, I do think that part of what is wrong is they need a little bit more youth here. Sophie Schmidt has retired. She played her last tournament in the World Cup. She's a legend of the game. Obviously, Christine Sinclair retired from international play as well. She won't be there. A big list of players that we all know the names. Alyssa Chapman, Vanessa Gilles. I always get it wrong. It's French. They'll get it right over there. Kaylin Sheridan, Jessie Fleming, Adriana Leon, Jordan Heidema, Julia Grosso. Listen, there's some youth in there. Jordan Heidema, Julia Grosso, they're in their early 20s. But the rest of them, late 20s and above. Is that part of the problem?
Potentially. I don't really know who's coming through for Canada. We're not seeing any sort of like, barring Heitema and Grosso, we're not really seeing any sort of like starlets coming through who we can be like, oh wow, yeah, Canada's got a really good player come in, and they could be exciting. But I still think they've got a very good squad, and even people like Gilles, who's 27, and Sheridan, goalkeepers don't really like peak till 30 anyway. So Sheridan's still got 3 years until she's peaking. Yeah. Jessie Fleming, we forget how young she is. She's 25, but she's played on the world stage. She's played at Chelsea. She's played in Champions League. So she's very experienced. And then Adriana Leon being 30, I didn't even realize she was 30, to be honest. She still has.
She might even be 31. Honestly, these are ages that I'd pulled before the World Cup. She might be 31.
she's still got a lot of legs in her, a lot of life in her, and I think that they have a good mix of youth and experience. But as those players start to get on for the next competition, that's when we're going to be a little bit more concerned. I wouldn't say I'm super concerned for the Olympics right now, but because the squads are so small, you know, it's not like they're taking huge squads here. But when it comes around to a World Cup, I think we're going to see a transitional period for Canada, and it might be not pretty. If the federation isn't backing them and not providing them with the youth programming that they need, so then it's going to be a problem.
I agree. I'll add in Jade Rose, who plays at the back for Canada. She's young, 21 years old. She's up and coming. Obviously, Kadisha Buchanan, star, who plays for Chelsea. Yeah, of course, Riviere. Ashley Lawrence, Chloe Lacoste. The list goes on and on. This is a roster that, alike to France, you can look at the entire roster and every single name is a household name for somebody who follows women's soccer.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Bev did a great job in the last Olympics. I'd love to have seen a better game against the US in the Gold Cup. It would be interesting to see how it would have played out if they'd had the opportunity to play football versus run around in a swimming pool and try and play football. So, like you mentioned, in the group stages, they didn't really have a lot of competition to judge them on. I would be interested to see if Bev can pull a little bit of a tactical masterclass again here. And she likes this tournament, and obviously need a little bit of luck to get all the way there. And they got that in the last Olympics. And if anyone deserves a little bit of luck, it's Canada for what they're going through right now.
Yeah. And I mean, hey, you mentioned depth. Perhaps that's also partly what won them the gold medal back in Tokyo, because when you talk about squad depth, Canada has it. There is not necessarily a best 11 on this team. When you look at all 18 players, no matter who they are, it's an incredible lineup where you can rotate truly anybody in on any given day, and the performance won't drop off. And I think that's really important. And finally, New Zealand, our former World Cup hosts, who, like you mentioned, Amy, started off on fire, flaming with a 1-0 win in the World Cup to kick off their home World Cup against Norway. I have that image of Hannah Wilkinson scoring that goal plastered in my brain because it was the first game of the World Cup, and the joy on her face will live forever in my mind. So you kind of can't help but root for this squad because they stole all of our hearts in the World Cup. They really, really did.
Yeah, they did. And they were obviously the co-host nation with Australia. And they're a team who we didn't expect too much out of. But when you're the co-host, the stadium and the fans always give you like a renewed energy and enthusiasm and belief that you can do more than you actually are capable of doing. And that's what we saw in the first game was an absolutely
you can
shocking
also
result.
Couple that with a complete flame out from Norway, who perhaps were the biggest disaster of the 2023 World Cup.
I'm not really surprised at that because Norway just flat to deceive in every single major competition, it seems, since, I don't know, maybe like the 90s when they were actually good and competitive and won things. This is a Norway team where you think on paper you should be doing way better. Anyway, we should talk more about New Zealand versus Norway. Yeah, so like you said, they started off like a house on fire in the World Cup, and Hannah Wilkinson scored that legendary goal, and then you thought, wow, they could potentially go on and maybe qualify for the next round, and then it it went a bit wrong for them. They drew against Switzerland and then lost. The loss to the Philippines was equally as shocking as their win against Norway, I would say, in so many ways.
Yeah, it really was. When New Zealand beat Norway, I was like, great, they're in. I'm looking at the rest of their schedule. They're going to beat the Philippines. They're going to tie or beat Switzerland. They're in. And that's not what happened. So I think even here, again, we're seeing kind of like two sides of this team where they can step up in these big moments and also they can flame out really hard. But listen, this is a team that is coming off a big World Cup. They obviously qualified here, which is no small feat. What can we expect from them? I'm personally very excited because this is a team that is exciting to watch. They're not going to sit back and play for a tie, they're going to go for it. And part of that is Hannah Wilkinson, who I absolutely fell in love with watching, A-League player, just goal scorer, outright goal scorer for New Zealand. What are you expecting from them?
To be honest, I'm not expecting too much from them. I don't think that they can beat any of these teams in this group, and that's just a flat out honest opinion.
Yeah,
they're gonna give it their best effort, but they don't have enough world class players like the other teams do to be competitive here. And part of the reason is that they've qualified is because their qualifying campaigns and groups are not strong. They're not as strong as a European qualifying group, nowhere near. And it's usually New Zealand and Australia who qualify out of that region, and that's exactly what's happened again. It's New Zealand on Australia. So, not saying that New Zealand don't deserve to be there, because they've obviously had to play games and beat teams to get to where they are. But I don't hold a lot of hopes for them, and sadly for us, we don't get to watch a lot of New Zealand games or Australia games unless they're playing against a European nation or a CONCACAF or a CONMEBOL nation, because they just don't show those games here. And so it's really hard for us to really critique them through their qualifying campaign and say, okay, yeah, they have a chance, but I still don't think they do, from judging what they did in the World Cup and the multiple friendlies that I've seen them play against the US over the years. I can't imagine that they've improved that much where they would be like, okay, yeah, we can qualify out of this group, unless one of the teams really, or two of the teams really implode. Then I can't see it happening. And the quality players that they do have in Wilkinson and obviously Ali Riley with LA, I don't think that's enough to get them through.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they're in the most recent international break, they played Japan twice. They lost 2-0 and then 4-1. I think that says a lot, but Japan is a really solid squad. Sadly, I agree. So this might be time for us to move on to predictions. I sadly think that we might think the same thing in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'll remind everybody that because there are only 3 groups here, the first 2 teams of all 3 groups will advance. And then the best 2 third place teams advance. So there's only 1 third place team that doesn't advance. So there's a chance here that, for example, the third place team in this group advances. We will do that whole bracket stuff later. For now, let's just do 1, 2, 3, 4. How do we think that they fall?
Okay, I'm gonna go France 1, because they do well in their group stages. I'm going to go a little controversial. I'm going to go Colombia to finish above Canada.
I actually don't think that's controversial. That's what I was going to do. Yeah.
I do think with Myra Ramirez being back will really change the game for them, and we'll see a similar side to the World Cup. And I'm hopeful that we see some of that, great free-flowing football that they can play. And then I'm going to go with Canada 3rd, and I'm going to go with New Zealand to get 0 points in the group.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry, New Zealand.
I actually agree. I think it's France, Colombia, Canada, New Zealand. I think it's going to be a really close call between Colombia and Canada. I think them facing off against each other is going to decide a lot. And hopefully the third place team in this group advances, because I would really love to see that. But it's a tough group. So,
well, I think we're going to say that about all the groups, because there's so many good teams in every group that you're just like, okay, I hope the third place team advances out of this group. I hope, bear in mind, there's only 3 groups. So we want to see obviously all the best teams advance through to the next round. But I mean, Bev's proved people wrong the last time around. So I'm sure that she won't mind us saying that she's the underdog for this one as well.
That Colombia-Canada game is going to be the 3rd group stage game. So the last group stage game will be possibly the game that determines who goes and who doesn't, or who has a secure spot and whose fate is really not in their own hands.
That's exciting.
Very exciting. I love doing these because they also get me really excited for this tournament. All right. That's it. That's Group A of the Olympics, everybody. A reminder of when they start, because sometimes these tournaments start before opening day. The first game of the Olympics women's soccer tournament is Thursday, July 25th. Thursday, July 25th. Mark it on your calendars. Thanks, everybody, for listening. For Amy, I've been Sarah, and this is the Women's Soccer Show.